to hear from the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy at the Economic Forum in Davos.
Dear friends, everyone remembers the great American film Groundhog Day with Bill Murray and Andy McDowell. Yes, but no one would want to live like that, repeating the same thing for weeks, months, and of course for years. And yet, that's exactly how we live now. And it's our life. And every forum like this one proves it. Just last year, here in Davos, I ended my speech with the words, "Europe needs to know how to defend itself." A year has passed and nothing has changed. We are still in a situation where I must say the same words, but why? The answer is not just about the threats that exist or may appear. Each year brings something new for Europe and for the world. Everyone turned attention to Greenland. And it's clear most leaders simply are not sure what to do about it. And it seems like everyone is just waiting for America to cool down on this topic, hoping it will pass away. But what if will not? What then? There was so much talk about the protests in Iran, but they drowned in blood. The world has not helped enough the Iranian people, and it's true. It has stood aside. In Europe, there was Christmas and New Year celebrations, the seasonal holidays. By the time politicians came back to work and started forming a position, the Ayatollah has already killed thousands. And what will Iran become after this bloodshed? If the regime survives, it sends a clear signal to every bully: kill enough people and you stay in power. Who in Europe needs that message to become a reality? And yet Europe hasn't even tried to build its own response. Let's look at the Western Hemisphere. President Trump led an operation in Venezuela and Maduro was arrested, and there were different opinions about it, but the fact remains: Maduro is on trial in New York. Sorry, but Putin is not on trial. And this is the fourth year of the biggest war in Europe since World War II. And the man who started it is not only free, he is still fighting for his frozen money in Europe. And you know what? He is having some success, it's true. It's Putin who's trying to decide how the frozen Russian assets should be used, not those who have the power to punish him for this war. Thankfully, the EU decided to freeze Russian assets indefinitely, and I'm grateful for that. Thanks Ursula, thanks Antonio, and all the leaders who helped. But when the time came to use those assets to defend against Russian aggression, the decision was blocked. Putin managed to stop Europe, unfortunately. Next point. Because of the America's position, people are now avoiding the topic of the International Criminal Court. And that's understandable. It's American historical position. But at the same time, there is still no real progress on establishing a special tribunal for Russian aggression against Ukraine, against the Ukrainian people. And we have an agreement, it's true. Many meetings have taken place, but still Europe hasn't reached even the point of having a home for the tribunal with staff and actual work happening inside. What's missing? Time or political will. Too often in Europe, something else is always more urgent than justice. Right now, we are working actively with partners on security guarantees, and I'm grateful for that, but those are for after the war ends. Once the ceasefire begins, there will be contingents and joint patrols and partner flags on Ukrainian soil. And that is a very good step and the right signal that UK and France are ready to actually commit their forces on the ground, and there is already a first agreement on that. Thank you, Keir, thanks Emmanuel, and all the leaders in our coalition. And we are doing everything to make sure that our coalition of the willing truly becomes a coalition of action. And again, everyone is very positive, but, always but the backstop of President Trump is needed. And again, no security guarantees work without the US. But what about the ceasefire itself? Who can help make it happen? Europe loves to discuss the future, but avoids taking action today, action that defines what kind of future we will have. That is the problem. Why can't President Trump stop tankers from the shadow fleet and seize oil, but Europe doesn't? Russian oil is being transported right along European shores. That oil funds the war against Ukraine. That oil helps destabilize Europe. So Russian oil must be stopped and confiscated and sold for Europe's benefit. Why not? If Putin has no money, there is no war for Europe. If Europe has money, then it can protect its people. Right now, those tankers are making money for Putin, and that means Russia continues to push its sick agenda. Next point. I've said it before and I'll repeat it again. Europe needs united armed forces that can truly defend Europe. Today, Europe relies only on the belief that if danger comes, NATO will act. But no one has really seen the alliance in action. If Putin decides to take Lithuania or strike Poland, who will respond? Who will respond? Right now, NATO exists thanks to belief that the United States will act, that it will not stand aside and will help. But what if it doesn't? Believe me, this question is everywhere in the minds of every European leader, and some try to get closer to President Trump, it's true. Some wait hoping the problem will disappear. Some have started acting, investing in weapons production and etc., building partnerships, getting public support for higher defense spending. But let's remember, until America pressured Europe to spend more on defense, most countries were not even trying to reach 5% of GDP, the minimum needed to ensure security. Europe needs to know how to defend itself. And if you send 30 or 40 soldiers to Greenland, what is that for? What message does it send? What's the message to Putin, to China? And even more importantly, what message does it send to Denmark? The most important, your close ally. You either declare that European bases will protect the region from Russia and China and establish those bases, or you risk not being taken seriously because 30 or 40 soldiers will not protect anything. And we know what to do. If Russian warships are sailing freely around Greenland, Ukraine can help. We have the expertise and weapons to ensure not one of those ships remains. They can sink near Greenland just as they do near Crimea. No problem, we have the tools and we have people For us, the sea is not the first line of defense, so we can take actions, and we know how to fight there if we were asked and if Ukraine were in NATO. But we are not. We would solve this problem with the Russian ships. As for Iran, everyone is waiting to see what America will do. And the world offers nothing, Europe offers nothing, and does not want to enter this issue as a supporter of the Iranian people and the democracy they need. But when you refuse to help the people fighting for freedom, the consequences return, and they are always negative. Belarus in 2020 is the example. No one helped their people, and now Russian or ethnic missiles are deployed in Belarus within range of most European capitals. That would not have happened if the Belarusian people had won in 2020. And we have told our European partners multiple times, act now against those missiles in Belarus. Missiles are never just decoration, but Europe still remains in Greenland mode. Maybe someday someone will do something. The issue of Russian oil is the same. It's good that many sanctions exist. Russian oil is getting cheaper, but the flow has not stopped. And Russian companies that fund Putin's war machine are still working. And that will not change without more sanctions. And we are grateful for all the pressure put on the aggressor. But let's be honest, Europe must do more so its sanctions block enemies as effectively as American sanctions. Why is that important? Because if Europe is not seen as a global force, if its actions don't scare bad actors, then Europe will always be reacting, catching up with new dangers and attacks. We all see that the forces trying to destroy Europe do not face a single day. They operate freely, even operate inside Europe. Every victor who lives off European money while trying to sell out European interests deserves a smack upside the head. And if he feels comfortable in Moscow, it doesn't mean we should let European capitals become little Moscows. We must remember what separates Russia from all of us. The most fundamental line of conflict between Russia and Ukraine and all of Europe is this: Russia fights to devalue people, to make sure that when dictators want to destroy someone, they can. But they must lose power, not gain it. For example, Russia's missiles are produced only because there are ways to bypass sanctions. It's true. Everyone sees how Russia tries to freeze Ukrainians. Now, our people, Ukrainians to death at minus 20 degrees Celsius. But Russia couldn't build any ballistic or cruise missiles without critical components from other countries. And it's not just China. Too often people hide behind the excuse that China helps Russia. Yes, it does. But not only China. Russia gets components from companies in Europe, the United States, and Taiwan. Right now, many are investing in stability around Taiwan to avoid war. But can Taiwanese companies stop contributing electronics to Russia's war? Europe says almost nothing. America says nothing. And Putin makes missiles. And I thank every country, of course, and every company that helps Ukraine repair its energy system. This is crucial. Thank you to all who support the Pearl program, helping us buy Patriot missiles. But wouldn't it be cheaper and easier to just cut Russia off from the components it needs for missiles production.
Right, well, that is the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy speaking live at the World Economic Forum, one of the biggest gatherings with top leaders from around the world in Davos in Switzerland. Let's go back now to Hashem Ahalbaro, who's been following all of today's events. We've also got Yulia Shapovalova, who's in Moscow, and Audrey McAlpine, who's also in Kyiv. Hashem, I'll start with you there, because quite incredible, really. Zelenskyy saying Europe must act now, it must do more, it must defend itself. And in fact, he says Europe loves to discuss the future and pretty much said that it stops short of taking action. Quite a scathing speech, I'd say, from Zelenskyy there when it comes to Europe, saying it's not doing enough. What's your takeaway, given that, you know, Europe itself is collectively facing new threats when it comes to Greenland?
A scathing rebuke, indeed, of the Europeans, of the Americans, and of the many countries, he said, didn't do anything to help those oppressed, and the Ukrainians in particular. That statement when he said, Maduro is on trial in New York, but Putin is in Moscow, it just gives you an indication how far the potential for a peace agreement Zelenskyy thinks could happen in the near future. And he said, I told the Europeans time and again that you should have a joint military force to defend and protect yourselves. Otherwise, you will lose the fight over the future. He's been very critical of many countries for providing assistance to Russia in the past to build critical components of its missile system. He said not only the Chinese who support the Russians, but also companies operating in the US and in Europe. Now, Zelenskyy had a meeting with Trump. He said it was positive. Trump administration said it was a positive outcome, and they hope that when Witkoff goes to Moscow and meets with Russian President Vladimir Putin, the chances for finalizing an agreement is there, particularly when it comes to the security guarantees and to the implementation of the ceasefire and the role that the monitoring forces will have to play inside Ukraine once the truce is announced. But as you saw a while ago when I asked José Manuel Álvarez, Spain's Minister of Foreign Affairs, about the chances of a deal, he said, I don't trust that Putin is genuine about reaching an agreement with Ukraine. Right. That gives you an idea about the challenges ahead for Ukraine and for the Europeans.
Hashem, and that's exactly why we'll be speaking to Yulia in a moment. But first, let's go to Audrey McAlpine, who's live for us, as we were saying, there in Kyiv. Audrey, Zelenskyy wasn't planning on going to Davos in the first place, perhaps a change of heart, but pretty much saying, as we heard there, that Europe needs to stop Russia the same way that the US stopped Maduro, and then also mentioning a very crucial part for Ukraine, which is these security guarantees.
He did, and it was, as Hashem said, a rather scathing speech in regard to the Europeans. Now, it almost in some ways echoes Trump's address to Davos yesterday, being very critical of the Europeans. And perhaps this is a plea from Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy to President Trump, almost to side with him. We saw, which he has done repeatedly, he has framed Ukraine as the last line of defense for NATO, and as he compared Ukraine and Greenland as a sort of a front line between them and Russian aggression. Now, the big question on the table right now is security guarantees, which he's hoping to have backed by the U.S. and which include boots on the ground from France and the United Kingdom in the event of a ceasefire. We heard in that speech that he also called on other European allies to also commit to something similar. He also mentioned a united armed forces in Europe. This is a point of discussion that has been discussed, here and there over the past several months, but that is is becoming a larger part of the discourse as of late. But it has yet to be seen, again, the final details of what those security guarantees are. And that was what was meant to be ironed out in this meeting. Zelenskyy said he would not travel to Davos unless he was coming to sign a document. But it doesn't appear that he has done that.
Yeah, and certainly he has said that the meeting did go well, but didn't really disclose the details of what was discussed exactly. Now let's go over to Moscow because we have Yulia Shapovalova, who's also been listening in to what Zelensky has been saying. Quite a focus there on Russian oil, making comparisons with the situation that's happened in Venezuela and saying that it's actually Putin that should be on trial in the US. On the other hand, we have the Americans that seemed quite optimistic in what they were saying. US Envoy Steve Witkoff saying if both sides want to solve it, that it will be done. What is the view in Moscow? And I say that because we have had some sort of a reaction earlier today saying that it appreciates the peacemaking efforts of Trump and his team. But what does that actually mean practically?
Well, the American side obviously tries hard to bring peace between these two countries, between Russia and Ukraine. Two US representatives are heading to Moscow right now. We're expecting them here later on tonight. Actually, there are not many details about this visit to Moscow. Russia's demands actually remain unchanged, while Ukraine can't accept them. Russia is not going to make any territorial concessions and give up the lands it has taken under its control during this almost 4-year war. Russia wants Ukraine not to join NATO and remain a neutral state. Russia wants presidential elections in Ukraine. It wants a more loyal to Russia government there, and so on and so forth. And therefore, despite Steve Witkoff's statement that the peace settlement and the peace agreement is in its final stages, reportedly some of Putin's fundamental demands are not taken into account in the draft plan prepared by the Americans. So rapid progress at today's meeting is unlikely to be achieved. During their previous visit to Moscow back in December, these US negotiators brought the so-called Trump peace plan to the Kremlin, and Vladimir Putin called it a good basis for a nice peace agreement. And since then, the plan has been revised by Ukraine and its European allies and agreed upon with the US. Reportedly, there are several topics to be discussed here tonight. A package of documents on ending the conflict and security guarantees for both countries, for Russia and Ukraine, the creation of a demilitarized zone, and also a draft agreement on the creation of a free economic zone in Donbass. But the question is how it will be organized. For example, Russia would like the presence of its National Guard there, which is unacceptable for Ukraine. At the same moment, Russian President Vladimir Putin stated that he plans to discuss the use of Russia's frozen assets with the US representatives here today. He has said that he's ready to allocate Russian assets that remain frozen in the US to the reconstruction of Ukrainian regions affected by the war after the conclusion of the peace deal.
All right, thanks very much for the updates, Yulia Shapovalova in Moscow. And of course, we have been hearing from the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy speaking there from World Economic Forum on all of the latest when it comes to that war.
Don't miss out on the full picture. Subscribe to Al Jazeera for reliable news and expert insights. Like, share, stay ahead.